So the first thing is cutting discretionary spending, mostly by cutting those bureaucracies. Education is very important. But what the hell is the federal government doing in education? It's so far removed from everything, it just shouldn't be there. It shouldn't be taking our money. We should be putting up the money for education, whatever money you spend for education, where we can control it, in the states and localities where we live, and it shouldn't be in the federal budget. That's one place where you could cut. The Department of Commerce, the president is proud of the fact that he's brought contracts to IBM and Exxon. Well, what about the competitors of IBM and Exxon? Why should they have the federal government going out helping their competitors? Why is the federal government helping General Motors and Chrysler against the other companies, car companies, that are doing a better job? If I'm doing a good job and I have clients, I don't want the federal government to be supporting another accounting firm that's going out of business because they don't know what they're doing, and the government's going to support them by giving them their business so I can't get their business even though I'm doing a better job. It's crazy. That's what's happening. Discretionary spending's got to be cut. Why can't we go back to the 2008 levels and say anything we did since 2008, I'm sorry, it may have been a good idea at the time, we couldn't afford it, so sorry, we'll go back and undo it. Just undo everything that we put into place since 2008. And if we think something was such a good idea that it should be in there, well, let's get rid of something else. When you only have X number of dollars, you got to figure out what's most important. You got to live within your budget. You don't spend what you want to spend and then figure out how you're going to pay for it later. That's not a way to run a household or a government. Number two, Social Security. There are three things I said we need for this Deficit Commission report to deal with the deficit. One is discretionary spending. And by the way, discretionary spending, two of the important things in the discretionary spending, farm subsidies. This is idiotic. Why are we subsidizing sugar to be 3 times the world price of sugar? I mean, the effects of it are ridiculous. Brazil is using ethanol. It's very cheap ethanol. It's very good ethanol. It's made from sugar. Why sugar? It's very efficient to make it from sugar. It's dirt cheap. It's an economic way to produce fuel. Well, if Brazil can do it, why can't we do it? We can't do it because sugar costs 3 times as much because the government artificially inflates the price of sugar in this country. And by the way, if you think, well, then maybe I'll buy some sugar from other countries. No, you can't, because you got to pay tariffs so that you can't buy cheap sugar from anywhere else. Well, can I buy import chocolate? Well, you got to pay huge tariffs on the imported chocolate too, because you see the Swiss have this huge advantage. They pay so much less for sugar than Hershey does in Pennsylvania that we gotta put tariffs on it. So we're spending a fortune on these farm subsidies and corporate welfare. All of it should be gone. The government should be out of the business of picking winners and losers. Back to Social Security. What are we going to do for Social Security? The problem with Social Security is that our legislators have basically said, I'm going to get elected by promising more and more Social Security. And somebody tapped them on the shoulder and said, where's this money supposed to come from? We're not collecting enough money actuarially from people to be able to pay for it. Don't worry about it. We'll get elected a couple of times, we'll retire, it's somebody else's problem. In a private company, if somebody's got a pension, you go to jail if you don't set up enough reserves in that pension to make sure that if you promise this guy, if he's working for you this year, and because he's working for you this year, he generates a certain amount of future pension, you got to hire actuaries to figure out how much money you have to put aside today so that that pension will be there when you retire. And by the way, that's what actuaries do for a living. That's their job. It's a difficult job. It's complicated. They're smart. They have a lot of schooling. They know what they're doing, and they figure out in private industry, you have a pension like that, they figure out how much money companies got to put in each year to make sure that when you get there, there's enough money. Well, the federal government doesn't do it at all. They don't put aside any money. They're going to put that burden on our children and grandchildren. And so when Ted Kennedy in the 70s decided that he was going to make a big increase of Social Security, but not pay for it, he became the good guy. And the people who said, no, cut Social, he said, you're taking money out of the mouths of old people? He said, how can you do that? And he was treated as a savior, but what he was doing is putting the country into a direct path to default. So now we have another 30 years of promises that couldn't be met, and so the question now is what to do. My feeling, and somewhat mirrored by the deficit reduction report, is from now on, we start today, from now on, whatever the retirement pension is, whatever people put away, it goes to their pension. It's self-sustaining. We don't promise people more than we can afford with the money that's coming out of their pay. If they think they can get a better pension by putting the money into a 401k, fine. If they want the government to do it, fine. But the amount of money that goes for their pension is no more than could be purchased with what comes out of their pay. That's fine for the people that are working starting today. But what about all those people that have been working all these years, and now there is no money set aside to pay for them when they retire? Well, that is really the question, and that people are not focusing on. We could deal with Social Security on a going forward basis. The problem is, what about the promises that were made in the past? One thing I'd like to do is at least have some mock trials against the people who voted for that Social Security that was unaffordable, and get those names that have been responsible for stuff through the years and get them on the faces of everything as villains and not as the saviors that they're being portrayed. But what can be done? Well, you can save the system to a pretty significant extent by just realizing a fact of life, that you can't work for 30 years and then collect a pension for 30 years. Retirement is not a period of time equal to the amount of time that you've lived. So you can't start work at 25, work to 55, and then collect pension till you die. It just doesn't work that way. When Social Security started, the retirement age was 65. The life expectancy was 57. So the only people who ever collected Social Security were people who outlived their life expectancy by 8 years. My favorite story is my son needed to go to a special piano teacher because he had a problem with his wrist. There was this 90-year-old piano teacher in Brooklyn that was supposed to be superb at dealing with wrist problems. We went from Westchester down to Brooklyn. He had his lesson. She was sharp. She was aware. The phone rang after his lesson was over. She answered it, excused herself for a second, came back with a smile on her face. She said, "What was that?" I said, "Oh, that was my daughter. She was telling me how happy she was that she collected her first Social Security check." You cannot have 2 generations of people on Social Security. That's not what Social Security is. If you want to retire at 55 because you made a lot of money and you worked day, night, and weekend just saving it all up, that's fine. But that's not what you're entitled to by your working. It's just, if you don't put the money away for it, you can't do it. So the first thing that has to happen with Social Security, the retirement age has to be raised to something that's more rational with people's much longer lifespans. And it would only take over time. It wouldn't happen right away. People 55 or older now would collect the Social Security the same way. People 55 and younger would start being phasing into a system where retirement age would go from 67, the Deficit Commission report said, to 69 over 75 years. That's ridiculous. By the time 75 years are over, we'll be living another 10 years longer. We'll be in worse shape than we are now. But I'm thinking, the analysis that I've seen and done, 70 or 71 over 25 or 30 years, it should be. People, 65 as a retirement age was created not even by FDR. 65 as a retirement age was created by Otto von Bismarck in the 1800s. They decided 65. And now we're 130 years later and we still have the same retirement age. It's crazy. We should be really 75. People are vibrant. Why should people be retiring at 65? It's crazy. The other possibility, if it's necessary to keep the system going, is some level of means testing. And people say, well, that's terrible. I paid my money into the Social Security. Now you're going to tell me I can't get it out? Well, the truth is, there's already means testing. If somebody has paid into Social Security over their lifetime X number of dollars, and somebody else who has much higher salary has paid in 2x worth of dollars into the system, you'd think in a regular system they should get a pension that's twice as much. It's not. So there's already means tested. There's already a welfare system built into Social Security. Already the people are only getting like 1.5 times, even though they put in twice as much money. It may be that's necessary to skew it a little bit more, so that's one thing. Again, these are not things that we like, but these are things that can have very significant effects, and if it's necessary to save the system, we should think about it. The other thing is, the inflation that is included in the Social Security system now is not inflation increases, it's cost of living increases. So the Social Security increases that are built into the law now are bigger than the actual inflation increase. If we just limited the increases each year to inflation instead of to cost of living, we would be in a much better situation, and we wouldn't have to do some of the other things that I was talking about in terms of age increase. So it should be some combination of those three things. It can be done without increasing the Social Security taxes. Increasing Social Security taxes, I think, would be terrible. It's bad for the economy, and it's bad for people's incentive to work. The last item that is deficit reduction, which is going to have a big effect on our future, is health care. The biggest failing that everybody acknowledges on the President's Commission, and actually the reason that some of the Republicans that I was talking about actually voted against it, is because it was deemed to be untouchable. Nobody wanted to, in the Deficit Commission report, to fight with Obamacare. Everything had to be with Obamacare. They had to tweak it a little bit. Nobody could come up with, let's get rid of Obamacare and start over. I think if we can get rid of Obamacare and start over, we can actually save the Medicare and Medicaid system. What needs to be done? What's really the most annoying and anger-provoking thing of Obamacare was that there are only 2 ways we know of to actually reduce the cost of health care. I mean, sometimes you say, well, we can reduce the cost of health care by paying doctors less. Well, that's not reducing the cost of health care. That's just changing who is paying for it, but the costs are going up. 2 ways, and only 2 ways we know to reduce the cost of health care. One is tort reform. Fewer lawsuits, lower insurance premiums for doctors, less preventative medicine, tort reform. The second way, have people pay their own damn medical bills. Instead of saying you can go to as many doctors as you want and only have to pay a $10 copay in each one, just say, look, you have major medical, if something terrible happens to you, it'll be covered with insurance. And by the way, that's relatively cheap. Yep. To have major medical, you're only covered if you spend more than $5,000 a year. That's not very expensive. The expense comes in the first $5,000. So here's the point. What you have is gives everybody, instead of giving them this go to as many doctors as you want and you're only $10 copay, give everybody $2,000 that they can spend at a doctor. It's what they have things now called health savings accounts, which are exactly the kind of thing I'm talking about. But like a countrywide health savings account, what everybody would have is $2,000. From that, you get your preventative exams, you get your eyeglasses, you get your all of your tests, you get your routine examinations, you take care of everything. It would be higher for families than for individuals, but you'd get X amount of money, and you got to pay it. So when you go to your doctor, when was the last time anybody went to the doctor and asked how much the visit was? I mean, all you care about is the copay. But if you went to the doctor and he said, well, it's $100 for this visit, You talk to your friend and his 80. Well, is your doctor better? I mean, you have a real market.